next up, we have Cezar Capacle, who is a Brazilian tabletop game designer currently based in Madeira Island. He's been creating games since 2016 and has dedicated his life full time to creating games since for the last 3 years, releasing over 30 games, which is very impressive. Known for their light rules and quirky mechanics. And after getting recognition in the community with various awards and wins, they've also been translated into 8 different languages. So lots of fun stuff to check out, and is here to talk about randomness and complications. I'm excited for this as some kind of cross knowledge sharing from tabletop into roguelikes, since I think that there's a lot to learn from each other in terms of how to deal with narrative and randomness. So, excellent. Welcome to Roguelike Celebration.
Very much. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. All right. Take it away.
All right. Thanks, guys. It's a pleasure being here. Thanks to the Roguelike Celebration organizers for the invitation. As Alexei said, I am a tabletop game designer, so I'm excited to share some insights from the pen and paper side of game design, and I hope it can resonate with you somehow. The topic today is enhancing narrative through randomness and complications. We've got a lot to cover, so let's jump right in, shall we? All right, so if you're familiar with tabletop RPGs, one of the many multiple ways that we can analyze how RPG adventures are conducted is dividing them between railroad or sandbox. Those terms mean generally, there have different interpretations, but generally railroad means pre-established events that unfold in a set sequence. So there's a clear path to the story, and players move along this path. There is little deviation from the plot points that have been planned. On the other hand, we have sandbox adventures. That will be like the open world approach. You players have the freedom to interact with the world however they choose. The story emerges on their actions and what they choose to interact with. There are more flexibility. However, regardless of which approach you choose, there are two assumptions that work for both of them. There are key things here. Number one is there is a predefined world with existing lore, NPCs, locations, factions, and ongoing events. It's a living, breathing world created before gameplay starts. And the second traditional assumption is that there is a game master, which is a person, different responsibilities from the other players, which is responsible for preparing everything, the adventure, the world, plot points, or populate the world with NPCs, locations, and everything. Regardless if it's a railroad or a sandbox, those two assumptions are usually traditionally considered the case. Now, in the games I design and I enjoy, and many other people also do, we tend to challenge these two traditional assumptions. First of all, we have an anti-canon approach. There is no predefined lore or established truths. The world is created, developed, and experienced as we play. There is no preset world building at all. Perhaps some brush strokes, and that's it. Also, I tend to enjoy more GM-less games, which is there is no single person responsible for prepping everything, the adventure or world. And so the game does not rely on someone, an intelligent being, bringing outside knowledge into the game to clarify and fill out blank spots. Everything is generated and decided within the game itself and together, collaboratively amongst all players involved. How is that possible? Well, one of the tools that we use is what is called the Oracle. The Oracle is a mechanic that answers questions that a game master would typically handle. So, simple yes or no questions. For example, we arrive at town. Is it raining? Yes or no? Or do I recognize this person? If you don't have this preset, you have to have a tool to answer those questions. So you either roll dice, draw cards, often modified by probabilities or likelihood, and you get a yes or no answer. Now, There are also complex questions that can't be answered with yes or no answers. So there are open-ended questions like what, where, why, and how that you have to have different tools to answer that. The Oracle uses prompts or randomly select words that work similarly to divination tools like tarot cards. These words, they don't have a predefined interpretation. They rely on the players using their imagination and especially the context they're in to create answers on the fly without needing to have someone that holds all the truths about the game. A classic example would be what's in the chest. Let's suppose you're adventuring through a dungeon and stumble upon a chest. On a traditional setting, the GM would be responsible for that. If he or she didn't prepare, if they didn't prepare that in advance, they would rely on tables, perhaps treasure tables to roll or specific tables for that dungeon. Predefined tables are common, but they're limited because they rely on anticipation. That means you have to anticipate all kinds of possible interactions that players will have to your world and perhaps have a dedicated table for each one of those circumstances, which can be almost impossible. Now, on the other hand, open-ended interpretative oracles, they are used instead because they don't rely on those assumptions and you can use those random words in the way that better fits the situation. Let me give you an example. So what's in the chest? One way to approach this would be with what Mythic Game Master Emulator, one of our original systems to play GMless, defines them as meaning tables, meaning that you roll one or two words using a D100 die, and you combine these two words to interpret in the context of the story. So here, for example, what's in the chest? And I roll heal and fear. You can go the very obvious route and say, okay, there is a healing potion that removes the fear condition. That's fine. However, if you are considering the context of the story and perhaps your character is afraid of mimics, you know, that monster that takes the shape of objects, especially chests, and you open this chest and there is nothing inside. So heal and fear here could mean, in the context of this specific storyline that you're living, that the fact that you open a chest and nothing bad happened to you, it kind of helped you overcome your fear of mimics. So it is more tied to the specific narrative of your character, of your party, and of your adventure specifically. So that's the power of random words using in context as a divination tool. Now, one might say that creating everything on the fly and creating is all based on random encounters and random words will generate a very gonzo scenario with situations that don't stretch together, just a series of undefined events that have no cohesion and a chaotic mess as a result. From my experience, that's not what happens really. And that's because we as human beings have a tendency to find patterns in everything. The mind's ability, which in the real world can be seen as cognitive biases that can be very harmful in real world situations. They're actually helpful in role-playing games when you are creating everything as you go along, because you can rely on things like apophenia, which is the tendency of the human brain to perceive patterns and connections in unrelated or data. And also confirmation bias, which is the tendency to interpret information in a way that confirms existing beliefs or expectations. So when we're faced with random oracle results or encounters, we tend naturally to weave them into a cohesive narrative, similar with how we interpret divination tools, because that's what our brains tend to do. So everything that seems like random stuff, when we reintegrated it back into the narrative using the human nature, basically relying on this behavior, we tend to create cohesive worlds and even be surprised by our own definitions and interpretations of those random encounters and scenarios. The sweet spot for me is offering a balance between surprise and confirming expectations. They should provide, oracles should provide unexpected answers that break away from the common and predictable responses that we would usually do if we were not relying on those tools. And at the same time, they need to confirm certain expectations to maintain this coherence within the story that we're developing. So when you reach that sweet spot that you go, oh, of course, that's the answer for that. That's why I found this chest here. Oh, that's why she recognized me. It is a small surprise, but it feels like you foreshadowed that revelation in the past, even though you're creating the answer at this very moment. This gives the player a sense of satisfaction and cleverness because you were able to connect all these facts and come up to this conclusion that can be both surprising and also fulfill the expectation of a possible foreshadow created from other random events that you rolled previously in your narrative. So what I mean to say here is that random is different from meaningless. A randomly generated world is not meaningless. With our ability to create patterns, we can craft compelling narratives even if we're creating them as we played it. If we refer back to the elements that we introduced and create those connections, those random events create a cohesive world in the end. These approaches often lead to more interesting outcomes that we could even have written without these tools. They can be more surprising, different, and less predictable. Now, without a game master, there is no one to push the story forward or decide what happens next. Okay, we have interesting elements being created by the oracles, but players still need to move the narrative along. In a typical RPG, players will often look to the GM and ask, okay, what happens next? And without this person, how do we ensure that the story progresses and that the players stay engaged and know what to do next, basically? Well, one way to do that I like very much is by the use of complications. Most specifically talking about the concept of fail forward, which is where even failures push the story forward, often creating new avenues to be explored. Stories, they thrive on drama, which is built from conflict. And conflicts arise when characters don't get exactly what they want. So fail forward is a way to ensure that even when players fail a test or roll, the narrative continues instead of offering a stop block. Complications don't stop progress. Instead, they offer narrative paths. This concept has become a significant development in more modern RPGs that help maintain this momentum, avoiding dead ends. Traditionally, conflict resolution in tabletop RPGs used to be binary. You roll a die, often add modifiers, and you have to meet or beat a target number, or a difficulty rating, however you may call it. Success means that you get things that you want, and failure means you don't. In many cases, those failures lead to a blockage in the story. Like, for example, you're trying to pick a lock, you roll for picking a lock, and you fail. Nothing happens. The story stalls. What happens next? Without the game master say, okay, something happens, we need tools to push the story forward. So with this binary system, there are many instances in which the results were kind of dull. You either waltz away with a success or you hit a dead end with a failure. So it breaks the momentum of the narrative. Now, with partial successes, that have been popularized by the Apocalypse World game and its series, hundreds of variations that have been created. Although, mind you, that was not the first game to use it, but it's probably the most popular one nowadays. You have this new middle ground of results, which is the partial success. In this case, you would roll 2d6, two traditional six-sided dice, and add your modifiers. On a 6 or less, it's a miss. A miss is not that nothing happens. Something happens that you didn't want to happen. So it's failure means that it's not what you wanted. For example, you pick a lock, trying to pick a lock, and you alert the guards, or you break your tools. 7 to 9 is a partial success. You get what you want, but there is a cost, a compromise, or a complication. For example, you pick the lock, but you lose time, or you find an enemy behind the door as you open it. And 10 plus would be a full success. You achieve your goal, sometimes even with an added benefit. For example, you pick the lock and you discover something valuable behind the door, or you avoid a potential danger. Now for me, the 7 to 9 range is the Goldilocks zone. This partial success is what drives the story forwards. I call this the Indiana Jones effect. You get what you want, but you stumble into another complication and you keep the action moving forward. So there's this snowball effect of resolving one conflict leads to the next, and you create this constant engagement with the story. You move from one obstacle to another without halting the story in any way. After the first initial push of the inciting incident at the beginning of the adventure, you pretty much rely on these roles to make sure that the story moves forward without the need to inject anything else. Statistically, players will land in the 7 to 9 range most often, so that creates a balance between the satisfaction of getting what you wanted from that role, but the stakes of the added complications. So you neither waltz away with the success, nor become to a dead end with a complete failure. However, those complications and partial successes can get very tiring very fast. They have informed the way I design games since I discovered them, but the majority of my games now include some form of partial success. But after you use them for a while, they can become taxing after long sessions. About 1/3 of your results land in the partial success range, so you have to constantly creatively come up with new complications and new story paths. It can become a little repetitive or predictable, like relying to default outcomes like, oh, okay, you get this, but you get hurt in the process. Or it can get overly complex. You keep adding layers and layers of threats and story paths to a point that you don't even recognize what was the original storyline that you were following. Your mission has been deviated so far from the original task that you had at hand that you don't even recognize it anymore. Now, how can we address that? Well, you can rely on oracles as well to create complications. Either using those random words that I showed you before, or if you have a dedicated list of predefined complications. However, I want to show here a middle ground approach that I developed for my game Midnight Melodies. In this case, when you get a complication, you have a dedicated oracle that lies in between random words and specific predetermined complications. I distilled 6 keywords: break, harm, lose, escalate, drain, and expose, and coupled them with a few keywords to interpret those outcomes that give you some guidance in ways that you can create engaging complications, but they don't fix you into a predefined narrative. So, for example, you're picking the lock and you roll escalate suspicion or tension. You can say that, oh, okay, I'm messing with the key here, and we narrate a cutscene showing that the guards hear a noise and they say, oh, that's probably nothing. So you have two advantages here. One, you create complications that you couldn't perhaps have thought without the use of this tool. And second, you can get a break and do not add complications that completely deviates the story to another direction. In this case, the example I gave, you can keep going forward in the direction that you have, but you know that there is a rising tension in the horizon, a looming threat that might put in risk the story that you're, or the mission that you're following. So it avoids repetitiveness, but also offer a way to keep the narrative, the main narrative, going forward. Now, I talk about oracles to offer inspiration and complications to push the story forward. However, they are tools, isolated tools. They need a structure to function smoothly. And for me, this is where procedures come in. I advocate for established procedures in tabletop RPGs because they create a framework for a sort of what I like to call structured randomness. Procedures, they guide players on when and how to use those tools, like oracles and complication tables. So there is clarity and consistency in gameplay. Sometimes I even include flowcharts like this one. So you start here and you frame the scene that you're in, and you decide what kind of a complication arises. You decide on your approach, and then you roll to see what happens if there are paths that go in different directions. You conclude the scene, and then you start over creating a new challenge or a new scenario. So this allows for players that are playing without a game master to look at the narrative, to progress the narrative, even when they think they don't know what to do next, because there is this structure back there to back them. Now, there is resistance somehow still in the tabletop RPG community to structure procedures because they can seem to be restrictive or similar to a board game-like experience. Well, RPGs aren't supposed to be freedom of choice and you can do whatever you want. Providing a fixed structure, procedural structure like that, wouldn't it compromise the open-ended free-form spirit of role-playing games? No, this concern stems from the misunderstanding that those procedures predetermine the story beats or plot points in a specific order. This is not the case. We are not talking about a railroad where everything is pre-planned or predictable. This experience is not going to be a preset series of events that players just follow. No. Instead, the procedures, they work on the mechanical level, not on the story level. They guide you on how and when to use those tools to ensure that your gameplay experience is smooth and moving forward. They don't dictate the story beats. Instead, these structures support a variety of narratives and keep things moving, even when you feel like, okay, what's supposed to happen next? When those mechanisms, these procedural mechanisms are running in the background, the players have a freer and more diverse storytelling experience, not a more constricted one from my experience. You can play the stories, focus on the stories, and if at any moment you feel like you don't know what should happen next, you look at the mechanics and you see, oh, I can inject an oracle here to determine what's the motivation of this NPC, or, oh, I failed this roll. How can I insert a complication here to raise the stakes of the story, for example? So, to summarize, I believe that oracles, when well-crafted with evocative, curated words, combined with the human ability to create patterns and connections, allow players to work beyond their expectations and assumptions and create interesting, cohesive worlds without the need of a preset, predefined, gigantic lore. Now, that together with embracing complications, dramas, and conflict as drivers of interesting narratives, it pushes the story forwards in interesting and unexpected directions. It encourages you to to follow branching stories and surprise yourself with the results of the dice. All these together with a cleared, well-oiled procedure that organizes the flow of the gameplay gives you a framework that you can trust. It's a game that you can trust. I think that's very important. That will tell you what happens, what to do next. Together, these elements can result in a richer, more engaging, and satisfying role playing experience in which stories emerge dynamically and organically and naturally as you play. That's all I have for today. Thank you. Made it to the end. Yay. My name is Cezar Capacle. You can find all my links and my socials, my Patreon, my games at quirky.games, and I'll be available for questions.
Wonderful. Love the confetti at the end. Yeah, no, that was fantastic. Yeah, lots of enjoyment in the chat. Really cool. Lots of people also like it was reminding lots of people of their favorite games and Oracle decks and things like that. So lots of links I think ended up in the obelisk from this, which is great. We have
Excellent.
one question up already, and people go ahead and add more questions. I think we'll have time for a couple. But Silence Walker wanted to clarify what is the difference between a table and an oracle if both of them are like curated beforehand to fit the mood and theme of the game and are kind of like that pre-created thing.
Right. Excellent question. There's definitely a Venn diagram with some juxtaposition and interlapping of those concepts. Some people treat them as the same thing. What I like to call the distinction here is that what I like to call oracles are the ones that are not predefined statements. As an example, a treasure random table would be like you find 100 gold pieces. This is a random table, and there is like 5 sapphires, 20 silver pieces, a helmet. Those are hard coded, I would say. Whereas an oracle will give you random words that might provoke a thought. That doesn't mean that oracles can't be curated. Even if they are not pre-specified results, you can have, as I've done in the past, you can curate some words that will inspire and evoke the feeling for those kinds of specific things. So you could have an oracle for magical items and treasure in which you have a lot of verbs that evoke, for example, magical effects like transparent, void, fire, shadow, freeze, or mishaps of magical effects like corruption, decay, metamorphosis, or mutant. And then you roll both, and you know, for example, what's the power of this magical item and what kind of corruption it might have if you use it in the wrong way. But they are still, in a way, open to interpretation. I've made a companion a supplement for random games called Random Realities that goes for that approach. So I have a set of tables for crafting locations, crafting cities, NPCs, magical items, scenes, obstacles, monsters, and everything. So they're still open to interpretation, but you kind of direct those interpretations when you offer words that are more relevant to the thing that you're trying to create.
Right. That makes sense. Yeah. And that is interesting. I wonder, actually, do you have any like advice or techniques? Because you were sharing the list of partial success keywords that were quite evocative. How do you go about finding? Because I feel like so much of a lot of forms of proc-gen and randomness is about finding that right level of abstraction of it's not too specific, it's not too vague, it works. So what kind of techniques do you use to try and narrow down like those six good words or like
Yeah.
finding that sweet spot of abstraction?
There is however Elder is a game designer that I love. She wrote, or they wrote Monster Hearts 2,
Mm.
Monster Hearts 2, dream askew, dream apart. And they said once on Twitter that game design sometimes is working for 4 hours and say, there, I have a list of 12 words. And I couldn't agree more. Sometimes you write like 20 pages of setting specific things in a sitting in a day, and to create and curate 6 words on a random table, it takes like a week. And because distilling those concentrated and very evocative words is not easy. My tip for that is consuming as much as possible of other people's work. This is what I did. That includes other published games and even videos of people saying, "Oh, this is my favorite way to do this in my home games," and Reddit posts and everything. I compilated like I'm not kidding, like 200 different words. And by trial and error, I tried to come up with the six that are more the broader. And I have, in fact, in the game that I mentioned, one for the complications that I showed and one for advantages. When you have a success in your test that is more than what you expected, and those have also 6 words. So if you're trying to find a balance between too random or too specific, my goal would be to actually consume a lot and try to find words that are too similar or either too broad or too specific, and then you kind of write it down and you kind of see the words that sit in between those, and you go for that sweet spot between random and specific.
Excellent. No, I think that's great advice. And yeah, like someone said, this is why game design is a job. It is in fact
Right,
not
yeah.
specific. But well, wonderful. Thank you so much, Cesar. It has been wonderful to have you. And I hope you enjoy the rest of the conference. And if people want to discuss this further at the breakout, it will be in the Joust Arena.
I'll be there.
Excellent.
See you then.
All right.
Thank you.
Yes.